The Kia Soul EV might be one of the most underrated electric cars around.
You see, the Kia e-Niro gets a lot of credit and attention, quite rightly, for being one of the first mainstream electric cars to offer a huge electric range, not for a huge price, and all in a compelling EV package. Then, after that, we had the Kia EV6 and the new Kia Niro EV, all of which have really cemented the Korean manufacturer as a leading name in the electric car market. But Kia's electric revolution started long before them. It began with the Kia Soul, which was a small, quirky, boxy SUV launched in 2008 with petrol and diesel engines. But the second generation Kia Soul in 2014 spawned the first fully electric Soul EV.
That car came with a 27 kilowatt-hour battery, CHAdeMO fast charging and a real-world range around 100 miles. The trouble was, it was about £25,000 after the government grant of the time was factored in. And it wasn't particularly great value, even compared to the few EV competitors it was up against at the time, like the Zoe and the Leaf. So things never really took off for it.
But the second generation Soul EV, the car that we have here, is a very different proposition. It was first launched back in 2020, just after the e-Niro, and it had the same battery, the same electric motor. It was very, very similar to the e-Niro. But the e-Niro was first, and it was a bit stronger in a few areas than the Soul EV. So this car always felt like it was in the shadows of its stablemate. But at the start of 2023, this car was given some changes. The main change is the introduction of a new battery option. When this car first launched, it came with a 64 kilowatt hour battery that gave it a huge official range of 280 miles. Now, after these changes, you still have that option, but you also have this smaller battery option. It's 39.2 kilowatt hours, has an official range of around 171 miles, and the theory is that it's perfect for cities. Now, we'll talk about what this is like to drive in a minute, but first, what's the Soul EV like to sit in? Well, in quite an understated way, this is actually a great example of how designers can make something that looks pretty good, but is still very simple, very effective and easy to interact with and use, and still be very comfortable as well. So there are two trim levels with the Soul EV. The smaller battery gets the urban trim level. The bigger battery gets the Explore trim level. But no matter which one you go for, you get loads of adjustment in the seat. You get a nice high up driving position. If you go for Explore, that's when you get adjustable lumbar support. You also get electric adjustment in the driver's seat. But even on the entry level trim, these seats are comfortable, nicely padded, supportive. And every trim also gets this digital driver display, which doesn't have loads of different layout options. It's not amazingly configurable, but it's very simple and it's very easy to see. And another great thing is it's pretty much impossible to block any part of the screen, no matter where you want your steering wheel or your seat set up, which is great. And the layout of the dashboard is very logical, easy to get your head around. It's especially nice having these really big chunky dials for the climate down here, and they're so much better to use than something that's hidden within a fiddly and glitchy touchscreen, which is very distracting to use while you're driving, but no problems here at all. And the infotainment system that you get in the Soul EV is very simple, but very good, really. On the entry-level trim, you have this smaller screen. If you go for Explore, you get a bigger screen. And this isn't Kia's latest infotainment tech. It's a generation behind, but it still gets Apple CarPlay, it still gets Android Auto. It's got a simple layout and it's responsive enough. But really both infotainment systems might not be class leading, but are still simple and effective. And the general quality in here is also pretty good. There are some hard, cheap feeling plastics around, and on this entry-level trim, this steering wheel in particular feels a bit kind of plasticky and hard, not particularly plush. But if you go for the top trim on the Explore models, that's when you get a leather interior, and that also brings a leather-wrapped steering wheel as well. But generally, even on this entry-level model, there are soft touch materials around, and it certainly feels really robust, solid, and well put together. And on top of all that, it's fairly practical up front as well. Okay, the door bins aren't huge, but you've got this comfortable armrest here, which has got a big cubby underneath it. You've got two cup holders in front of that, another tray at the top of the dashboard, and down the side of the center console as well, you've got these useful pockets. So all in all, in quite an understated way, this is actually a great electric car interior. Now, rear seat space in the Soul EV is very impressive. Remember, this car doesn't have an enormous footprint, but in the back, 2 6-footers will sit very comfortably behind people of a similar size in front. And you can see, thanks to this tall, boxy design of the car, headroom is really, really impressive indeed. So you actually have more headroom in here than you do in a Nero EV, but a Nero has slightly better legroom, it's a little bit wider, so overall that is slightly more accommodating than what you get in the Soul EV. But the differences really aren't huge, and you can see legroom still decent. There's a lot of space for your feet under the seat in front as well, and the floor isn't completely flat, but this central lump really isn't that big at all. So even if you've got 3 people sat back here, foot space should still be absolutely fine for them. The Soul gets a 315 litre boot, which isn't that big, to be honest. It's smaller than the Nero EV. In fact, it's only a little bit bigger than what you get in the back of a Ford Fiesta, but it's not all bad. What you do get is this tall load space. You get a hard parcel shelf which you can fold back, and it's actually very handy that this folds in half and you can remove it easily, and because it's not huge, it's very easy to store in the boot itself as well. You also get a height adjustable boot floor as standard, and in this highest setting here, you can lift it up to reveal loads of underfloor storage underneath where you can just stuff the charging cables, or if you lower it to its lowest setting, then you increase the overall capacity back here. And in total, you can fit 6 of these carry-on size suitcases in the back. So it is not the biggest boot in the EV world, but it is still usable. Now, what is the Soul EV Urban like in an urban environment? Well, it does actually live up to the name. This is a really good electric car around town for a number of different reasons. Chiefly, when you get in this thing, you appreciate that the dimensions of it are very easy to judge. So it is an SUV, but it's not an enormous SUV like a Range Rover or something. In fact, the length of this car is a little bit shorter than a VW Golf, and it's got that tall, boxy styling to things. You've got a high up driving position, all of which means it's very easy to judge exactly how big this car is, which is very helpful when you're trying to thread it down some cramped, busy streets with lots of other cars. Now, we explained that the Urban model has a smaller battery, and it also has less power than the other Soul EV. So this has one electric motor driving the front wheels with 134 brake horsepower, and that gives it a 0 to 62 miles per hour time of just under 10 seconds, which doesn't sound particularly quick, but actually this is definitely quick enough. There's enough power there for motorway journeys with no problem, and particularly around town, there's no issue at all with it feeling underpowered. In fact, if you have the traction control off and sport mode engaged, you have to be quite careful with how you apply some power coming out of a junction. But to be fair, that is a quirk of other early front-wheel drive electric cars as well, like the MG5 and even the previous Kia e-Niro. But when you're driving this thing sensibly, everything is very calm and relaxing. The power delivery is very smooth, as you'd expect from an electric car. The steering's smooth and accurate as well. The brakes are actually really impressive because in a lot of electric cars, they can be very bad and grabby and inconsistent in how they feel, but with the Soul EV, this is actually almost like it's a normal petrol or diesel car. And you've also got regenerative braking, which you can adjust the severity of using these paddles on the steering wheel here. And another really impressive area in the Soul EV is refinement. It's very quiet in here, especially around town. There's hardly any noise that comes into the interior. It's really calm, quiet, peaceful, just a very nice car to be in.
The Soul is also a comfortable electric car, albeit slightly firmer and more fidgety than a Nero EV or an ID3, but it does offer better body control than what you get in an MG ZS EV. When it comes to charging up the Soul, how impressive it is depends on the version you go for. The Urban's 39 kWh battery will take just over 6 hours to go from 0 to 100% with a 7 kW home wall box, while the Explorer's 64 kWh battery, because it's so much bigger, will take about 9.5 hours. For fast charging from public chargers, that bigger battery version can get a 10 to 80% top up in around 45 minutes from a CCS charger, which is pretty standard. But the Urban model, with its smaller battery, can only accept a maximum of 44 kilowatts of power from a public charger, which is almost half the rate the Explorer model can accept. That means after waiting around 45 minutes for a 10 to 80% charge, you probably won't even get another 100 miles down the road. The Explorer would likely go almost twice as far. Still, Kia has called this version urban for a reason, and it certainly is best suited to the city. The Explorer, with its significantly longer range, faster charging speeds, greater power, is the one to go for if you regularly drive long distances.
Whichever one you go for, you get loads of equipment as standard. So even the urban model gets 17-inch alloys, adaptive cruise control with lane keeping assistance, and an infotainment system as well. And of course, every Soul EV gets Kia's fantastic 7-year warranty as standard. If you do go for the Explorer model, then you get extra things like heated front seats, a heated steering wheel, a leather interior, and keyless entry and start. But with all of that, it's about £6,000 more expensive.
And there's the problem. The bigger battery version of this car is good, but at that higher price range, it's up against some very impressive electric cars, lots of which are bigger. And at the cheaper end, yes, this urban version looks like great value in the Soul's lineup, and especially compared to the Nero EV, but don't forget how short the range is. And then at this end of the market, there's lots of other electric cars it's up against as well, which might not be SUVs, but are still very good. But even if it isn't an outright electric car champion, the Soul EV shouldn't be forgotten and has a lot going for it, whichever version you choose. To find out more about the car and all of its rivals, go to whatcar.com, where you can also get a great deal on your next car. But before you go, subscribe to our channel to see lots more new car reviews and tell us in the comments below what you think of the Soul EV.